Hey guys, I am here with my dad, who is also a psychologist, and we are going to be talking about dealing with competition nerves and everything else like that. And we've also got a bunch of questions from you guys that we're going to answer about this as well. So, is there any introduction you want to give or anything?
Not really. I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity. I've wanted to be part of one of your videos for a while, and I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So, where do we start with comp nerves?
When was the first time you remember feeling nervous during a competition in a way that was interfering with your performance?
I've always felt nervous about it from my first competition, but the first time I think it really got in the way was when I started going for sub 10. So around like Dixon 2017 and then especially at Omaha in 2017. That's when when I really realized after I think two really close calls that didn't quite pull through that my nerves were getting in the way of my goals.
So that's probably around the time that you and I started talking about competition nerves and what you might try to do in order to, dial those down a bit.
Yeah, and I think at that competition, which was one of the few you weren't at, I contacted you and asked for your help for what I could do because I could tell that something was seriously wrong.
Yeah, you texted me, and so we had a text exchange about, doing a little bit of relaxation or visualization to relax yourself before each solve. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. I remember you. That's when you started the mantra thing. You told me to close my eyes and then before each solve, repeat to myself in my head, I'm here to have fun.
Which, of course, is different from I'm here to get sub 10. And while both are true, the more you focus on a performance goal like getting sub 10, the more your nerves and your anxiety actually go up and interfere instead of going down.
Yeah, and I think that's what my problem was for the for the first two averages was that after three good solves, all I could think about was sub 10, and I couldn't handle the pressure.
So what do you remember about how well some of those techniques worked at first when you tried them?
So I used those techniques in finals at that competition. And finals was sort of the opposite of the other two averages, where instead of starting well and not pulling through, I started off kind of rough and then it got better. And I ended the competition, I think, on my best solve of the competition and just barely missed sub 10 in that average.
So do you remember, it's been a couple years or something, but how did you feel at that point about being able to calm your nerves during competition?
At that point, I felt like that technique at that point was a success. And even though I didn't make it there, I felt like the fact that I pulled through, even though I didn't succeed, really showed that the technique was working. And obviously at my next competition at Nats 2017, in round one, I did pull through and got my sub 10 average.
And that was, of course, a big moment. Nationals, was by far the biggest competition you had been to at that point. And sub 10 is such a huge threshold. So there was a lot going on. But I think your confidence was building not just in your skill, but also in your ability to calm your nerves a little bit. And that matters a lot.
Yeah, and I think once you realize it's not just a roll of the dice. It's something you can work on, and it's a completely separate skill from cubing, so you can master cubing, and then you can master everything that you need to get ready for competitions. Then you have more control over what happens.
So looking back to that point from now, what would you say about learning to calm your nerves during competitions since then? Like, what has continued to work? What doesn't work as well for you? What would you tell your audience about that?
I'd say, well, obviously, though I think since then I've only added stuff to my routine or changed or swapped something out for something else. So I don't really do the mantra as much anymore as so now some of the things I do, of course, I still close my eyes, take deep breaths. Everyone knows I do the push to the side thing, which is your idea as well. And I try to completely focus just on what's about to happen and ignore everything that's already happened.
Right. So let's just be clear with your audience about what closing your eyes and taking a few deep breaths is about, because they might look obvious, but, in my experience working with people that, get nervous and get anxious in a variety of different situations, they don't actually know what's going on. So closing your eyes, first of all, shuts out, everything that's going on around you, at least visually. And taking a few deep breaths kind of resets, right, your system, if you will, so that you don't get into that habit of short, shallow breaths, which in an extreme form can be like hyperventilating if someone's panicking about something. And you're never close to that. But taking deep breaths kind of slows the system down and then puts you in position, right, so that you can continue with your routine. So then what comes after that?
What comes after that? So, first of all, with the deep breaths and stuff, I've always quantified that in terms of like feeling my heart rate. So I can kind of tell if it's working because my heart's pounding when I go up, and then by the time I start my solve, it's a little bit slower. And so what follows after that? So of course, NATS 2017 all went really well, and then that leads into competitions like Heartland 2017 and St. Louis, where I sort of have the habit of once I pass one barrier, I don't take time to be satisfied. I just move on to the next one. So I was already kind of thinking about, if not sub 9 already, at least my next PB average. Which, so at Heartland, I think I had at least one or two close calls for PBs. But I remember pretty clearly in that final that I remember being happy with pulling through and getting a sub 10 average at Heartland.
Well, we've talked a lot about how crossing those thresholds in competition is such a huge deal. Sub 10, sub 9, like each 1 second threshold for competition average is a huge deal. And then once you get below that threshold for the first time, it might take you a while to get below the next one, but it sort of gets easier on the way there. The other thing we've talked a lot about is when you're shooting for a PB or you're shooting to get past one of those important thresholds, what happens during the 5 solves if you do math in your head and you feel like, oh, I started out well, my first solve was really good, or my first 2 were really good, I have a chance at a PB here, I might really do it. And what can happen to you, at that point?
That can absolutely make you fall apart. And it's sort of an example of that. I remember going back to St. Louis, that's the one time where I really think that apathy has helped me get a PB, where in that final, I had just finished OH finals, gotten the really good average that I was hoping for more than anything else at that competition. And so for 3x3 finals, I really just didn't care. I don't think I got nervous, and then I just pumped out 5 good enough solves and got a PB average there.
And, of course you cared, but what I think you mean is you had already reached the major goal for that competition, so anything beyond that was going to be like a bonus.
Yeah.
And of course, trying to fool yourself into thinking you don't care more often doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Because you can't fool yourself. But the reason it works, if, right, it's genuine, is because, your heart's not pumping, you're not breathing shallow, and you're sort of free to just do your thing and use your skill. And it would be great if we could get to that point more often. But the truth is we care about stuff.
Yeah, and I think, of course, like you said, we can't pretend that we don't care. But in situations where I legitimately don't care, like, for example, I have never gotten nervous for pyraminx, for example, because I actually legitimately don't care. But, of course, you can't fake that.
Right. And I think that you've talked about OH sometimes, like if you're really shooting for a 3x3 average, and let's just say the OH competition at a particular event is not super strong and you're feeling confident, it's not that you don't care, but when you get to your OH solves, right, you're not really worried about how you're going to do because you're feeling very confident. And, sometimes that can really be helpful because you don't have any nerves to deal with.
Yeah, and I've actually, for the longest time, I never got nervous for OH, even though it's an event that I do care about. But starting at West Branch and then at Heartland, I did get nervous for it. And I think that's actually a particular success story for it, because obviously at West Branch I won and at Heartland I won.
Well, let's go back to last year's Great Lakes.
Let's go back in the timeline.
In Fort Wayne, where that's the first time I remember when you were really, great at OH, but there was at least one other competitor there that was essentially as good as you, and you really had to do your best, and it put a lot of pressure on.
Yeah, so just giving some context for that, and at the very beginning of 2018 I got my first sub 15 OH average, and like I said, I'm already thinking about sub 14 at that point. So at Cube, Iowa, I got a 14.02 average, and then of course sub 14 is really on my mind. So at Great Lakes, round 1 was a little bit disappointing, but of course it's round 1 and there's finals, so it doesn't really matter. And in finals I did well but not excellent and got second place.
And of course that can happen. You never, right? Other people are really good too, and you can't control how they do. But looking back on that, especially during OH finals at Great Lakes last year, how were your nerves? And do you think you had trouble kind of managing those more than usual?
I don't remember there being a lot of nerves, but there very well might have been. I think, let's see. So for that, I knew going into it that it wasn't going to be a free first place like it had been previously for one-handed. So I can't really be mad when people legitimately outcompete me even when I do well, because that's completely out of my control. I can be upset when I don't win because of my own mistakes, which hasn't really happened for one-handed. Like, I earned that second place. The guy that won earned that win at Great Lakes.
Did really well.
Yeah.
And he actually told you afterwards that he specifically practiced OH before that competition because he wanted to beat you.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a compliment.
Yes,
he did really well. It was very close. That happens.
Yeah, that happens. And so, of course, I can't complain about that.
So if we switch from OH to 3x3, there was the whole sub 10 thing, which 2 years ago at Nats, you finally broke through. And then, as you were saying, a year ago, January, right?
I got sub 9, and that's actually a very interesting story because there, I think going into it, I felt like if I could control myself, sub 9 is definitely feasible. So I know I got a very nice average in round 1. It was like a 9.1, which was also 9.1 was my PB at that point. And then in finals, that's where I really remember starting to do the push to the side, got off to a hot start, and then it just really, really worked, and I got an incredible average, especially for the time.
Yeah, I remember that really well. That was the first competition you won.
Yeah.
In 3x3 at least, if not
those are my first 2 wins ever. Yeah.
And there was good competition there. There were other competitors that were really good, and you really came through in 3x3 finals in a way that it's not just skill, but when I watch you compete, I know what your hands look like when you're solving and you're dialed in. I don't know any algorithms, but I know what it looks like because I've watched you so much. And I could tell your nerves were not in the way. Yeah. And that was kind of amazing.
And it really worked. Did a pretty good job. I mean, my last two solves were the worst two, but they were still good enough that I got sub 9, and I think that's what really matters. Sometimes it's good to think objectively about what's good and bad, and sometimes you need to consider the situation. And in that time, like, normally, even back then, I wouldn't be happy with a 9.7 and an 8.9. But when they're the last two solves in a sub 9 average, I can't complain too much.
Right. Now, that brings up the issue of what I fondly refer to as doing math in your head.
Yeah.
During, right, the 5 solves of a round in competition. Mm-hmm. And in that case, because you started out so well and had 3 good solves, you know, even though the last 2 were the worst 2 of the 5, you weren't worried about it. And you knew that because you were doing math in your head. We've talked about the flip side of doing math in your head.
Yeah. So doing math in my head didn't hurt me a ton there because as long as I got better than like 10.6 on one of those last 2 solves, I would have gotten sub 9. But yeah, normally it's not a good idea. Of course, we've already mentioned times where it's psyched me out, and let's see, going forward, I think we're at the point where we can talk about Nats 2018. So, I think, so doing math in my head, I don't really think I did any of that there.
I think there were other things going on there.
There were other things there. So the first round, I really got mad at myself because I lost a good average to a +2 on the last solve.
+2s and DNFs, or just poor solves compared to your usual. Like at this point for you, if you get a 12, I mean, I can't remember the last time you got a 12.
I got a 12 at Heartland.
I mean, that stuff happens, right? +2s, DNFs, you know, a bad time on a particular solve. And at that point, it's kind of a test of nerves to wipe that away and not let it ruin the next solve after that, right?
And that's part of the pushing it aside. In the past, we've talked about using that to not think about the good things that have happened. It's equally important, or even more important, to not let it bother you when bad things happened at the start. Of course, that was the end of an average, so it didn't really hurt my competing to need to walk away and be angry for a little while, but...
Well, and if it happens on your last solve of a round, right, you can walk away, you can take a few deep breaths, you can get something to eat, right, you can sort of take a break. But if it's not your 5th solve in a round, right, you've got, what, a minute, 2 minutes, something not very long to put it aside, and that's very challenging.
That's very tough. And of course, going back to Nats 2018, there was a big success story in terms of letting it pass, where in semifinals, I got a +2 on a 7 on my 4th solve, and then still clutched an average that made me make nationals finals.
Which I actually can't remember at this point. Do you remember during the semis, were you doing math in your head while you were doing that? No.
I remember specifically in those, like when I was preparing, I had my headphones on in the chairs in the back. I was just turning a cube, trying to stay in control of my turning and take some deep breaths. And then it just all came through, and I got 5 really nice solves.
Yeah, and I think that staying focused that way, treating each solve as an individual thing, and not thinking about the solve you just had right before, whether it was great or it was poor or it was mediocre, right? And just focusing on what's right in front of you. So that's easy to say. It's really hard to do.
It's really hard to do. And of course, at that competition, it worked really well there. And when we go to Nats finals, I didn't handle the pressure there. I don't think it was possible for me with the experience I had at that time to handle the pressure.
That was overwhelming. I mean, your mom and I were both there. Of course, we were so happy for you and so proud of you. And I know you were over the moon happy.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that is, right? It's the last event. There's hundreds of people in the audience. There's thousands watching it online. You know all of that.
Yeah.
It's right. The solves are in pairs up on the big stage. It's as if you're at Carnegie Hall in New York City. Like it's really a big stage, and that level of nervousness and anxiety, I think no one is prepared for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, if you compare me and my cubing accomplishments to everyone else up there, I was the only one that got in without a sub-8 average. Everyone else there was world class, has had world record, or almost all of them have had world records. They were like in a different league. I somehow like miraculously got a spot beating out people like Patrick Ponce and Dylan Miller somehow. And just as a side note, some people were calling that luck. I prefer to think of it as more as coming through in the clutch rather than luck. Because, I mean, I got those times, and they weren't, like, miraculous for me at the time.
No, they weren't.
But then I couldn't handle the pressure. I got...
well, before you get to what happened during your 5 solves in the finals at Nats last July, talk a little bit about going into the waiting area, and seeing all the other finalists who were world class and trying desperately to calm yourself so that you could perform.
I mean, it was a crazy experience. I was like, when I walked in there, the only people that were already in there were Max Park and his mom. And his mom knew my name, which was cool. But then all of them came in. They were all calm and just chatting and being buddies, and I was just off on the side pacing because I still was trying to process that this actually happened.
And they had all been there before.
Well, I don't know about that, but they'd all been in similar positions before.
I think you were the only first-time Nationals finalist of the 16.
I don't know, did Keon make Nats finals before that? But Keon's been on many big stages, but
right.
Not, like, if we go specifically by Nats, I might not be the only first-timer, but compared to, like, all of them, I had the biggest jump in scale with that.
And so you were trying to do whatever you could. You kept your headphones on, you tried to keep to yourself a little bit, probably take some deep breaths, whatever. And basically, would you say nothing worked?
I'd say, well, in hindsight, I think the headphones were kind of counterproductive because everyone was quiet anyway. But I'd say really I tried my deep breathing. It all just didn't work. I think I was in too much of a shock from the entire thing to really be able to control myself.
And so then what happened when you got up on the big stage?
So I was shaky. I think like the mental part of it, I was still functioning at close to, if not my average level, but physically my hands were not working correctly. Of course, I started off with a +2, then got some more not very good solves, and I was just too shaky to really be able to execute at my full level.
And you knew that, of course, and that didn't help.
Mm-hmm.
And I think looking back, there probably wasn't anything you could do to overcome, your first time on that big stage.
Yeah, and I don't think it's productive to really give myself a hard time about it.
No, I don't either. I think that the next time you're on a big stage like that, it won't be the first time. I think, that won't solve the problem completely. You'll still be nervous, but it won't be the first time, and that's going to matter.
Yeah.
It happens.
It happens. And it was, of course, like anything else, it's a learning experience.
How would you compare 3x3 finals at Nats last year with OH finals?
OH finals, I did not get nervous at all, actually.
So it's an OH finals at Nationals, at least last year, is not on the big stage. It's not not in pairs, right?
Well, it was the stage, but of course, all the cameras weren't on me. Everyone was going at once, and I mean, for both events, I knew I wasn't going to win going into it, but of course, I had never gotten nervous for OH before, and I didn't then. I can't really explain it, but my average wasn't that good, but oh well.
But at the same time, you weren't bothered during your 5 solves by the fact that you were nervous and couldn't control it.
Yeah, and I wasn't. Just now that I think about it, I think it was quite interesting. I had never been in like a round with so many fast OH people before. Like that's, of course, it never happens here. There in my region, there's me, there's Carter, there's Brian, and everyone else is light years behind us.
Yeah, so that, that makes it seem on the surface like there's nothing to be nervous about, which can help. On the other hand, right, everybody, including yourself, has had the experience where you pretty much think you're going to do great. You think you're going to win, or you think you're going to, right, get a PB average, and then somehow it doesn't happen.
Yeah. As for that, like, of course, I can't be upset about what happened at Nationals in OH or 3x3, but like making finals in both was an amazing experience, and of course, getting the really good OH average there set me up for thinking about sub 13, which I wasn't quite ready for at that point, and it set me up on 3x3 thinking for sub 8, which of course was a struggle for several months.
And there was also the effect of having made Nationals finals,
Yeah.
particularly in 3x3, but I suppose in both, right? Because, first of all, there was a break in time
Yeah.
between Nationals and the next time you competed, because school started and other stuff. But then also the next competition or two in the fall, this past fall, right? It took you a little bit of time to kind of get settled back in because those experiences really had an impact on you.
Yeah, and of course there's the story of that Madison, I didn't win 3x3 when I absolutely should have. I have no excuses for that. I don't know, to this day I don't know what happened, but again, it's just a learning experience.
Yep.
So
So after Nationals last year, you had some disappointments, first in Madison and then also in Independence.
Independence, I mean, I've never I've never been like super confident against David. I think he's currently at a higher skill level. At least he's consistently ahead of me, but at our peaks we're about the same, I think.
Yeah, I think that my sense of him is that he's a little bit more consistent, maybe.
Yeah. So I can't be mad about him beating me, which has happened many times. OH at Independence, I mean, there was that DNF, which was kind of dumb, that, of course, ruined my average, but I still won.
But I remember you were not, you were happy that you won, I suppose, but you were not happy with yourself.
I was not happy with, I mean, thinking about it in the sense of the rules, I guess, when I accidentally knock over the cover, that I guess I deserve a DNF. But then I should not be getting 16 OH averages now with my current skill.
So looking back with hindsight, right, which, as they say, is 2020, what was going on, both in Madison and at Independence, right? Because you were not performing at your normal level.
I mean, I can't explain Madison 3x3 finals. That's something that will, I think, forever be a mystery, that I just couldn't get anything going. I should not be getting 10.3 averages now either. But for OH at Independence, new OH cube for my first competition with it. I didn't love it, to be honest. It was too fast and made me change up my style a little bit, but I kept going with it because I was also unhappy with the cube I had previously. And then I think that combined with the DNF to start sort of set me off enough that, and of course once you have a DNF, everything else is counting. So when I got a 17, then that gave me a 16 average.
So, if we talk about nerves and we talk about the mental game associated with competing, my question for you would be, after nationals and all your success there, I know that in 3x3 finals you were, disappointed in your time, but you were super ecstatic to be there. What would you say about your expectations once you started competing again in the fall?
I mean, in terms of expectations, I didn't suddenly expect to be 10 times better than everyone else, of course. It's not like that making Nats finals made me improve at all. And I didn't really think about it in terms of, now that I've been in that situation, I shouldn't be nervous about local competitions, because of course I still am. But I don't know how that really changed my perspective, honestly. I think of course, I've had far more experience with local competitions, and I don't think one big final is going to change that.